Thank you to everybody who came to join us on the very last webinar series, webinars to this series. So my name is Jacqueline Hidalgo Mendez, and I am the program coordinator at WSCADV, and I'll let Linda go ahead and introduce herself.
I'm Linda Olson, and I've spent the past 10 years at WSCADV doing the DV Housing First project and housing in general on a broader sense. I've loved working with every single one of you on the call as well as across the state. So welcome everybody.
And also I'm wanting to introduce Angie Pacheco, who's joining us from one of the organizations. So thank you so much for being here.
So again, the reminder that we are on land that has historically for centuries had indigenous peoples living here, and it's important to honor that and to recognize that. So from where I am in Everett, Snohomish County, the Tulalip Reservation is not far away, including the different tribes that make up that reservation. In general, the Puget Sound area is the Coast Salish people. In Seattle, where our office is, the WSCADV office is, there is the Duwamish Nation, where they have their longhouse, even though they are not a federally recognized tribe. Seattle was their home, still is their home, should be recognized more as such.
Now, going back to our wonderful logo and tying all of this together as far as all of the webinars in the series, on Thursday, we went over about how we can build the capacity for domestic violence housing first in this approach, which really is encompassing housing first as a philosophy and a way of thinking, and really honoring and believing that somebody, that we are deserving of safe and stable housing, and honoring somebody's hope for housing as well. Our pillars, which we have kind of gone throughout the series, the first one would be in regards to the services being survivor driven, trauma informed, in providing mobile advocacy. And then we went over flexible financial assistance this morning. And then for this specific webinar, the topic will be community engagement. So these pillars really all on the platform of safe and stable housing. So housing advocacy, and how this is such a critical component with regards to the work that our advocates do at our agencies and our programs and our organizations. Advocates offer many housing options for survivors and their unique needs. And when we think of housing, we can think of all the different options as well. I think if you were at this morning's webinar, we touched on how somebody believed their boat to be their home, their safe place. So just looking, kind of thinking, or having an open mind to what housing means to the survivors and what they think that, or what they believe that they need and they want as far as their housing. Advocates additionally address the housing needs first, and then they work with the survivor on things related to stability for their housing as well as for themselves, and additionally work on monitoring safety as well as self-sufficiency. So advocates additionally accompany survivors to housing appointments, are able to be there with help and assistance in negotiating lease agreements, and also act as a liaison between survivors and their landlords. And I think of the lease agreements and kind of playing as that liaison role, I can't help but kind of reflect on how I think of sometimes some of the terms and agreements, and then the lease contracts and stuff can be kind of such a language in itself with all these technical terms and stuff. So really truly the value that of the knowledge that the advocates have with this process um, helps survivors so much in that way when we think about the survivors and kind of how their priorities and their primary concerns kind of often are related to housing, but also kind of trying to be stable and secure themselves and trying to get safe. So, such an important role. So, with regards to housing advocacy, it does require getting to know your community. And the key to finding housing solutions besides survivor driven advocacy does include building the relationships with housing and homeless organizations within our own communities, as well as building those relationships with the landlords that are in our communities as well. Just knowing what options are available is such an important housing advocacy component. The domestic violence housing first model does require that our advocates have access and knowledge of other community resources as well. And if I were able to click on a link, I might have to. Wonderful. Okay, so this link on the PowerPoint presentation slides does take you to the community engagement section at our WSCADV. So at our WSCADV website. And here, just wanted to kind of share this as a reference and such like something that can be additionally used as a tool. And this could also be a really good time to be pointing out that we as a coalition do a very good job. Well, we have wonderful individuals who are technically savvy and can function and are able to create and keep this website fairly updated at all time. So this website has so many additional resources and tools that we can be able to use. But for this specific section, for community engagement, you can kind of see it kind of walks you through things that maybe you can be reviewing, discussing within our organizations as well as our communities, and providing some different housing options. So organizational tools and tools to use with the survivor. So I definitely encourage everybody to kind of take a look at it and wanting and just being really familiar. Maybe you'll find things that you didn't really know were there before. That could be very useful.
I was just going to add to
Yeah.
again that that it would be great to take a look through it. As far as the training hours that we're counting, we're including the reading of the materials, some that were sent out to you that were actually links from the web page. But certainly reading through this counts toward your training hours. So please be sure and take a look at it. And yeah, I think that was pretty much it. So in terms of housing first, of course, the biggest thing we hear from folks is you can't have housing first without housing. So we definitely have that platform of housing. Housing first evolved from a practice that was used and developed among chronically homeless people, where there was that service package of mental health services, chemical dependency, substance abuse services, where there was the recognition of people who were in places of not necessarily being employed in a way that they would be able to afford on their own market rate housing without additional money, without subsidies, as well as without the service support that goes with it. That is not the pairing for domestic violence survivors, although a fascinating approach that is coming out of the UK, and they've been to visit us from the London organization to look at what we've been doing. And they actually have housing first as a part of their whole housing approach, but it's housing first in a way that is focused on those who struggle in housing and need additional supports. Since that isn't what we've got, we have to go through the whole range of options that we can see in the community that can best respond to the needs of survivors. So when we think of housing stability approaches, we have to think of both community partners as well as funding sources, and how we can put that together as community for survivors. One of the first approaches that we found out, to our joy 10 years ago when we first started doing this pilot, was how many survivors wanted to stay at home. They wanted to stay there safely. They wanted to be able to afford it. And one of the biggest things we found out with our flexible financial assistance was helping them do that, and all of the different ways that we were able to support them with securing their homes in a safe way that felt better for them. Um, this has become huge, and it's gone far beyond our state. It was something that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation really invested in and supported. So now, even as we look at Washington State, and other different jurisdictions, you hear a lot about diversion. And that concept of diversion really is this whole idea of what can you do to support somebody, perhaps stay in their own housing. It's a little bit more than what we've termed as prevention, which has often been just eviction prevention. This includes the whole array of possibilities for survivors in staying in their home. I think if you were there with us earlier this morning, you could see that our most recent flexible financial assistance report and update showed that 45% of the survivors receiving flexible financial assistance were able to stay in their home. That was their immediate housing outcome. So it's important never to overlook that, never to assume that people just want to come to shelter, or that you know, a certain type of housing is better and safer than what they might already have. Goes back to being survivor driven. Rapid rehousing is something that we have certainly participated in as a field. This is private landlords, private community housing that is subsidized by us through different grants, usually from HUD, part of the continuum of care. NOFA has rapid rehousing. We've also found that our emergency solutions or shelter grant money is now solutions grant, and that is also focused on rapid rehousing. And the idea is to support people getting into housing as quickly as possible. And it's important to say it's not housing first and that's it, but it's housing first and it starts services. So housing, then services, so that people, as they choose, have the opportunity to work with advocates in a way that they can retain their housing, identifying employment, other sources of finances, so that the rapid rehousing subsidy that they receive can be tapered or can eventually go away, and they can assume the entire rental amount. We include flexible engagement. There was a term that came out of Utah that was progressive engagement. We wanted to make sure that it wasn't just first month and then everybody could get that and that was it. It might be more progressively. We like to start out with the idea that this is flexible, and it's flexible based on the needs of the survivors. So an agency might look at a survivor, look at their funding, and say, right off the top, 6 months. We'll start by committing that and let's see where you are. Or maybe it's 3 months. Or maybe it's just that identification of the survivor from the survivor of what could be helpful for them. So this is both a housing approach as well as a certain funding source that comes both from continuum of care, HUD, as well as from state commerce if you are in one of the rural, smaller community programs. There's also subsidized housing, and we're all familiar with Section 8 and project-based Section 8, housing authority, investments, and something that is often critical, but we also know that there are long waiting lists for most of our housing authority, whether it's housing choice vouchers, whether it's project-based within our own facilities at times, or whether it is a larger project, a larger housing authority project. And then permanent supportive housing. This, of course, is what we really look to, again, often from HUD, is that supportive housing subsidy that is for those people who have a disability. There's usually a diagnosis, whether it's mental, physical, both. Sometimes chemical dependency disorders can come under this, but it is that permanent supportive housing that allows someone to stay someplace indefinitely without the assurance that they would be able to assume more of their 30% rent that they would be paying. We talk about permanent supportive housing at times for survivors. I've certainly advocated for funding sources that could go longer than the 2-year transitional housing funding source, or even the 2-year rapid rehousing funding source, but something that could be there from 3 to 5 years, because we know that survivors who have challenges with trauma and sometimes mental health and substance abuse need a longer period of time. We also know that survivors who are refugees and immigrants, because of language barriers, also often need a longer amount of time to grapple with things like a U visa or a T visa, or sometimes just working on their immigration status. So these are just the different things that we need to think about, including advocating for the laws that protect survivors. The Violence Against Women Act, HUD, has definitely got some great provisions that we need to be aware of, that no housing authority landlord that is under the HUD umbrella can discriminate based on domestic sexual violence or evict somebody when it's related to domestic or sexual violence. We have the same thing here in Washington State with private landlords, where the Residential Landlord-Tenant Act includes a victim component, so that, again, private landlords are not allowed to discriminate based on domestic violence, either in eviction or in leasing to somebody. So all important things to know and be informed about. There are a lot of private landlords in our state that don't realize this. So just tuck away, dig into that webpage, because there's definitely more information about that there.
So community engagements, it's all about the relationships. So before I give you this big old list, I guess I can take a little break to just kind of even have some space for just realizing and additionally reminding ourselves that we're all humans and we're all very social creatures and we're meant to communicate. The more that somebody is, and specifically with regards to this space for survivors, the more our survivors are connected to their communities, the more they're able to thrive and to be set up to thrive as well. So this once again is definitely not an all-encompassing list of different kinds of relationships and engagements that can be created within our own communities. We have some, and I won't kind of go through each one of them, of course, but we have a lot on here. And I actually would like to kind of take a second to kind of read through all of these on your screen, and I hope that they're clear, depending how big the box is versus everybody's little tiles on your screen. But kind of take a moment and see if there's anything else that we can add, anything that's been more able to be done within your own communities as far as establishing and engaging in these community relationships. There's some that are specifically related to housing, others more with like things that can kind of help with getting and attaining and keeping housing, such as transportation or even the safety within the home. There's, of course, things that are more related to health and wellness as well. Things that specifically are kind of more would be more kind of helpful to employment for the survivor. A few other things that once a survivor has their home or a place that they can be kind of helping it become more stable and helping it to create it and make it their own. Okay, so moving forward with it, when it comes to engaging community members, so establishing those partnerships. So how do we do it, and what are the benefits? And get a little bit more deeper into that. So us as either advocates or agencies and programs and with services that we provide, this is no surprise that we can't and we shouldn't be expected to just do it all. And if we're going to be really honest with ourselves, we won't always be able to be there for survivors forever. And this is definitely a topic that we've had some previous conversations before. And so, because it is not always possible for domestic violence programs to have all the resources that the survivors may need to become stable, it's important for us as organizations to make those intentional efforts to establish and really maintain those relationships with the community resources that we might have. So advocates can and they should go out to their communities to kind of leverage those strengths and resources within their communities to support the survivors. But of course, I say this knowing and relating it back to the current context, of course, with COVID-19, once it's safe to do so, and additionally acknowledging that when it does become safe to do so, to make sure to take those precautions to not only reduce anything happening, but improve risks, improve that there are no risks for advocates and survivors as well as everybody involved. But yeah, advocates should spend some time going out of their office and talking with landlords, business owners, other community members to create those connections that will support the survivors' safety, their independence, as well as their housing stability. Really figuring out who is already providing housing and homeless services, but additionally, even trying to see if there's options to collaborate too. Again, but besides those community connections, it's also important. It's also a really good opportunity to kind of inform and educate community members about things that are related, such as the prevalence of DV. Maybe it'd also be really useful to get the prevalence within our own communities to kind of have those numbers to kind of support the prevalence. What is domestic violence and how it relates to homelessness? Why will it be relevant for them and the community and the individuals who are going to be the tenants for them? And of course, the law. There's, as Linda was talking about, the VAWA 2013, as well as the Washington State Residential Landlord Tenant Act. These are good opportunities to really take advantage to kind of inform and educate our community members as well in that way. But in addition to developing those partnerships with the service providers, it's also important for advocates to really have the conversations and talk to survivors about their support networks and really understand kind of their unique position in that way as well, and how to also reconnect to their social networks. Sometimes they may have even lost touch with some as a result of the abuse that they have gone through, or maybe even building new community supportive relationships for themselves. Many times it is the case for our survivors, as we know that the abuser, as a form of coercion and having that power over them to kind of to break up or kind of like to even demolish the survivor support systems, not only with regards to their families, but also the ones that are within our own communities as well. You know, sometimes, for example, abusers can tell them not to socialize with friends, not to socialize with families, to stop going to church events, to stay home, and kind of they have their way of just taking back those and social interactions for our survivors. This so the community engagement, also working with survivors to increase their social support networks, really does help reduce the isolation and increase the support networks when once the advocacy also fades out, right? So when the survivors are really connected to the right resources and supports, they do feel more safer. They feel more stable. They're more equipped to move forward with their lives. And this just makes such a tremendous impact on the children as well, not only the survivors, but children if they have any, where safety means stability for children. And kids are able to be kids again. And again, thinking about how survivors have gone through so much previous purposeful isolation from their communities. Um, so yeah, and I do have a question, and hopefully we can get a little bit more conversation with this. For right now, are there any key things that your organizations are currently doing to kind of build on those community relationships? Anything that you found as far as creative or not even creative, anything that's been working? I want to kind of learn about what people have been trying, what has worked, what hasn't, what continues to work. Okay, so this slide right here is basically kind of going on how rebuilding social networks leads to resiliency and also increases housing retention for survivors. And more about this. So how do we do this? Often advocates and the survivors go together to search for housing and connect with community resources. So survivors find it really helpful and even more manageable when there is an advocate there to kind of help them navigate these more complex systems that they may or may not be as familiar with. And so these are a couple of quotes from some advocates. The first one being, we spend a lot of time talking about how to strengthen relationships with friends. It's important that we do that with survivors, encourage them to hold on to the friends that they have and figure out how to strengthen those connections. And another advocate, we talk about meetups all the time. We see building connections as robust and a rich area for support that's totally legitimate and needs our attention. It's having connections that open the door. So Linda, do you kind of
Yep.
want to go? Yeah?
Yep. I'm here. I'm taking a moment to reflect, and I see a couple of additions to the chat box. Amber says we attend homeless network meetings, landlords association meetings, etc. Joel is saying, in my PBV program, we have partnered with a local church to put on events. During COVID, they have been helping deliver fresh fruits and vegetables. So certainly some really important resources, connections. The earlier quotes talked about making friends. One of the things that we have spent a lot of time doing in our field has been to, in our goal of safety, is to put survivors or have survivors in confidential, hidden away locations and really disconnected from their communities. And while for many that's been just the thing that they needed, there are so many more that need their community, need their family members. Kind of going to that next slide, and having connections that open the door. An old quote that I've used a lot, and it came up in research a number of years ago, is that the difference between um, poverty and homelessness and poverty and being housed is social network, it's community, it is that friendship, the neighborhood, the way that people can lean on one another, support one another. And we have found in our work with DV Housing First that that is the key to housing retention. A huge comment really related to DV Housing First and how well it can be sustained for survivors has been the observations we've seen through focus groups, through advocate conversations, that being able to have community connections has been key. It has been that difference between homelessness and being able to retain what they have, and to be healthy, that longer term health and well-being goal that we are striving for. So just spending time with folks in a way that they can connect with people and help them find ways to support folks. Um, our side, as far as knowing our communities and the people and the resources, I think rural communities definitely have a little bit of an edge here because everybody knows everybody. And for an advocate to be able to support a survivor returning to that community, or perhaps a survivor new to that community, the advocate bridge can really make a big difference. So for advocates to help cultivate these relationships, have their own relationships, for agency folks to attend community events, ideally as community members, as part of that community, and be able again to introduce some survivors or reintroduce them to the different things that are going on in their community. Developing relationships to increase housing options. There's offered trainings here, and that's critical for your landlords, your housing homeless providers. And we do have a template on our webpage that offers a pretty complete training that individual agencies can utilize. And I'd be happy to help. Jackie would be happy to help adapt that for your services and purposes, but also the increasing housing options. And I've seen a couple of things related to churches. Religious communities pop up in the chat box. But what I've found in my own religious community is how many landlords are sitting in those pews. How do you have conversations with folks that would open up their eyes and their minds to all of the different people who might need housing, and not in a way that suggests they give people a break, though some of them are certainly willing to, but just in a way that offers a stable individual supported by an agency, and certainly finding their own path to stability. That can be a wonderful option both for the housing provider, for the landlord that might be your pewmate at church, and certainly for the survivor. Always be active, proactive, and flexible. Communicate. One of the things in naming our former executive director, Nan Stoops, and she's now our strategic advisor, she has dreamt a lot about community connections, about beloved community, about how we can support one another, both on the resource level, as providers, as service providers and supporters of survivors, but also how we can support each other, support advocates, and complement one another's services. And finally, it's just for that advocate who knows their community inside and outside, is a part of the community, go with survivors. Be present in their life as they would ask you to be, and ask for your support. And the next slide that I'll turn back to Jackie will definitely provide some guidance on how to do that.
Yes, because with community building, we can't forget about safety and confidentiality. And this can mean many things to both the advocates as well as for supervisors of our advocates. Specifically with respect to advocate, really understanding the entire situation. I think that as an advocate, something that could be that's really good is that you kind of have like more of a broader lens of the whole situation while really trying to understand. And again, this would be including having that partnership with the survivor and really trying to understand their entire situation, but then also being able to kind of take a step back and kind of seeing more broader sense about everything as regards to their safety as well as the survivor safety. Um, Asking survivors how they want to be addressed in public. This could be multiple things, as far as even when I take when I kind of think about how smaller communities and where everybody kind of knows everybody, how a little bit more difficult it can be, but trying to be creative to where if you do have to go out in public together, you kind of have the already agreement to like, okay, well, this is our story, and just depending on the situation for the survivor. Maybe it's being a cousin. Maybe I'm your long lost sister. Maybe it's just a family friend that's coming to visit for the weekend or whatever. But just making sure that you kind of have that consensus before, um, because there is always that risk, especially in the smaller communities where you're going to be running into, and sometimes even in the bigger communities where kind of the same kind of circle of individuals kind of stay within the same kind of area to the bigger community. Mm. Picking and selecting a place that's safe both for the survivor and the advocate, of course, is important. Safety is so critical, and so we can never forget to try to be as safe as possible. Sometimes that may be in a more private setting, so maybe the office at the agency, or sometimes it could be more of a public setting. But just really trying again, from both the inner and the outer lens, and just knowing what's safe for that specific circumstance, based on also what the survivor needs, together kind of thinking about the pros and the cons for each situation that you may find yourself in. Letting people know where you're going, so bringing your phone, whether it's your work phone or personal phone, whatever the advocate personally feels more comfortable with, can also be a factor. But making sure either there's communication going from the advocate or to the advocate, just keeping up to date on what's going on can be really good. As far as it maybe being a different advocate checking in, or maybe it's a supervisor checking in on their advocates. And then also trusting your gut. And I personally, I know that there's some kind of research out there. I just don't really have a specific article, and maybe that can be my homework. But there's just so many different situations and circumstances where somebody may just kind of have this gut feeling, and they unfortunately found themselves in unfortunate circumstances, but they always kind of had this feeling of, I should have listened to my gut. And we know that this might not always be the case, but again, trusting your gut, listening to your gut. If something doesn't feel right or it doesn't sound right or anything like that, making sure that we have the right precautions and the right safety protocols to kind of figure out a way to get us out of that situation, both for ourselves and then for the survivors as well. Now, with respect to the supervisors, really knowing where advocates are and where they're going. And once again, this isn't only, of course, during work hours, it could be during the weekends, because we know that as advocates, sometimes the work does go into the weekend, just depending on what, again, with regards to survivor driven and mobile advocacy, meeting the survivor where they're at, and then talking to and checking in with the advocates about their safety, their mental, emotional well-being, for themselves and as well as the survivors. So community partnerships have led to. This first quote here is from Domestic Violence Housing First staff, and it's, in the past, landlords said, "I'm not renting to those kind." Taking that in. Now landlords say, "What's going on and how can I help?" In some cases, landlords have reduced rent for survivors and counting it as a donation. So,
Jackie,
yeah.
I've got a great chat box comment that I'm now reading the whole thing from
Yeah.
Hansel Sanchez, that we've partnered with a Latinx church to connect people to and to host workshops. We've partnered with Latinx stores to run a Latinx food bank in April. And I love this. We've partnered with several organizations to fundraise to provide rental assistance to undocumented families in Spokane. We've helped about 30 families. And that is just the spirit. That's awesome. There's such a huge question about landlords and finding them when you are working with undocumented folks. And it is knowing the community, not just to get the rental assistance, as this quote so greatly describes, but it's also to make sure that there's a resource for people to rent to, and a supportive landlord who really doesn't care if they're undocumented or not, or if they are knowledgeable of that, are fine with it.
Yes, thank you. I love that too, just from my personal background and working with survivors. So thank you for that. The next one is, if the abuser shows up, the abuser's not going to get away with being violent. This is a quote from a survivor. There's zero tolerance for domestic violence, and the agency has partnerships with everyone in the community, which won't allow it to happen. They are keeping an eye out for survivors. So again, just taking in these quotes. I love the quotes. I previously mentioned that as well, because it kind of shares, it gives the survivor or an individual working along with the DVHF to really share their personal experience. And it's much more than just numbers, and it's much more than just, yes, this helps, and yes, this is working, and yes, this is good, but it's actually putting the story together and how it's working and what it can lead to, these big overarching impacts, not just yes. And we can't forget about the kiddos either. So there's much more of an impact on children as well. And then, so these are a couple quotes in the survivor's own words. The first one being, "They are smiling now. They run around the house. My oldest daughter has friends around for the first time, and everyone has their own space." And I think something that really stuck with me when I read this quote was, has friends around for the very first time. Often, in many of the cases for the children who are aware in front of the domestic violence, a lot of children are not physically forced, but they kind of mentally and socially forced to kind of grow up, and they it sometimes leads to them losing their innocence and their adolescent years, because they're kind of forced, it's forced upon them to kind of think more as an adult, and it kind of makes them lose their innocence. And so I love this quote too. "My son used to look out the window in fear, and he doesn't anymore." So really providing that safety as well for the children that are aware of what was going on and aware of them personally, as well as their guardian being in a risky situation where they're at risk for physical, emotional, social, financial abuse. "My children can breathe." And then the last one, "Kids are finally being kids again. I'm trying to teach my kids that their job is just to be a kid and not worry about things." So these are some impacts from the Domestic Violence Housing First Approach demonstration project. which, as a reminder, was a strategic initiative building off of the success of the 5-year pilot project with DDHF. And so the demonstration is a research project working to really bring together domestic violence housing and homelessness providers, as well as advancing the model essentially for intervention. So survivors feel more equipped to move forward and rebuild. Survivors regain control over their lives and really begin to heal. Stability and safety means kids can be kids again, and I love that. So key learnings, financial assistance, and advocacy need to be totally flexible. And this is all with respect to domestic violence housing first approach and philosophy. So really how the flexibility of the financial assistance is really so incredibly crucial. More advocates and resources are required in order to adequately support all survivors. And I don't know if this is anything new to any of us, how much it does take for everything. And then it takes time and effort to adapt to a new way of providing services. So this is really attuned to the previous misconceptions and how some individuals may or may not be finding the difficulty in accepting that housing first is housing first, and not necessarily you have to get services, or you kind of have to, and I put this in air quotes, be at a specific point before you get housing.
I just wanted to, on this second key learning,
Yeah.
because this was so important and was a huge conversation in several groups that we facilitated last year, and that is the question of quantity versus quality, and that because we are often so swamped, as well as because we know that we can serve more as agencies, and we tend to let funders know how many people we think we can serve based on the demand, and funders hold us to that. There is just the oversight of not realizing that it takes slowing down a little bit. It takes quality and a time investment for many that need a longer time, or maybe doing just fine initially, and then something happens down the road and they need to come back and preserve their dignity as far as asking for more additional. So it's a challenge in planning for that often for the programs, and it can be a challenge for funders who of course want to fund as many services, as many people as possible, but yet they might also, all of us together, need to realize that the better we can do with the folks coming in our door now, the less likely they are to have to come back to us time and time again, or be too ashamed to come back, or have their children coming to us. So yeah, it takes time and effort. That's where this last learning comes from. It takes time and effort to really integrate this approach and to really think about that, much as philosophically we all might want to. At the same time, actually doing it really is a commitment.
I want to introduce Angie Pacheco, who is the executive director at the Domestic Violence Services of Benton and Franklin County.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, and then I'll go into some tips of some of the agencies that I worked in to help advocates be able to find and use different resources that maybe you haven't thought about in the past when you're doing your outreach to the community. So I am originally from the Tri-City area, and I grew up there, and I also lived in the Bellingham and Mount Vernon areas in Washington State. And my primary work began with migrant farm workers through the whole state of Washington, pretty much, when I was following. And as part of that, I started working with the homeless population as well. And in addition to that, the domestic violence population. The areas that I worked in, or the organizations, were La Clinica, and right now that it has a different name, Tri-City Health Center, I believe, and I worked for them for 10 years. And then from there, I went to the Seattle area and worked for Seymour Community Health Centers throughout 5 of their counties, and came back to the Tri-Cities. And as a result, they wanted to start a migrant farm worker housing project. And that's when my career started in the housing entity. So I'm very passionate about housing. I have a lot of ideas, have been able to develop a lot of programs throughout different states. And so the housing career started in Washington, and we developed the Seymour Community Health Center in the Pasco location for migrant farm workers. What we did was we took an old hotel and we converted it into housing. We were able to convert automatically to 40 units for the migrant farm workers. Lots of domestic violence involved, lots of drugs and alcohol, lots of needed services for children and that capacity. So as part of having had the opportunity to see what can evolve from a community health center, I hope to see that as also an opportunity that we may be able to do throughout the state of Washington through domestic violence. By saying that is, I was able to see the evolution of 40 units to automatically do that. We worked in the community, we were able to get funding, and it would be wonderful if we were able to do that throughout Washington state, where we could provide services to domestic violence women in different counties, not just in one location, and where we would be able to utilize it for domestic violence clients. In addition to that, I went on to work in the state of Idaho, and I worked for the Migrant Council there, and I also worked for a farm worker housing project that was in Idaho. Some of these projects that I worked in were projects that my parents had traveled as migrant farm workers, so I felt really privileged to be on the other side, not as a child of migrant farm workers, but someone doing and making a difference for farm workers themselves. I know Linda talked a little bit about breaking the cycles and not having people come back. I hope people come back, but in a different capacity to help, and to be helping within their communities to provide better services, and coming back as children or as women of these services, acknowledging the fact that they are survivors and they've been able to make it. Now they're advocates coming back into our community. So it's really important for you to know that when you're sharing or when you're talking to families, also letting them know, hey, you can be part of not only helping yourself, but many other women and children by being part of an organization in social services or domestic violence. From there, I went on to work in the state of New Mexico, and I ran a housing authority. And in that housing authority, I ran Section 8 programs, public housing, and specialty Section 8 programs, and affordable housing. And then I moved on to California and Los Angeles. And in that area, in the Inglewood area, we did the Section 8 primarily, and also some project-based programs. Project-based programs are a really good start that domestic violence can start looking into, to be able to see if those can be created, or being able to talk to housing authorities to let them know that we would like them to have a couple of units exclusive for our clients. So now that I've given you, and currently I worked in for the domestic violence services of Benton and Franklin counties. I've been there since December, and came in from California, so really proud to go back to my community that I originally started, and being able to provide the services. And as a result of being out as a gypsy in different states, but coming back, I have an abundance of information, that can help strengthen the community, as well as being able to impact it, hopefully at a state level. So some of the things that I can tell you in reference to working with housing authorities is talking to them and asking them if you can come in and talk about your services to the staff, and so that the staff has the opportunity to know what the services are about. Asking them if they can create a preference on their waiting list so that they have the opportunity to give preferences to families of domestic violence. Asking them about their porting services. Porting is a type of service that if somebody is already living in a Section 8 component or in a project base, that they be able to be transferred out of their units and not lose their subsidy anywhere in the country, including Puerto Rico. And also looking at what they look at as their regulations under WAWA in reference to domestic violence. A lot of times it's really important if you're able to go in and talk about the services, you have a better connection. If one of their clients is going through that, you can assist them in a case management capacity and advocacy capacity to be able to move that family safe into another community. For example, if there was a domestic violence in the Seattle area and you needed to move a family into maybe the Tri-City area or where they had more communication or maybe had resources, that they could take their voucher with them and find housing there, and that you could work with them. So those are really important things that you can tap into the housing authorities and be able to have better opportunities for your clients that are on waiting list. If they do have preferences, that you could take your clients, and if domestic violence occurs, that they get some type of certificate from your agency and or some type of documentation from the police department for verification that they can take in, and that may move them up on the waiting list to be able to get housing faster. So those are really important movements that we made in the state of California, really working really closely with domestic violence clients throughout the whole state of California, or actually the whole country. Some of the other outreaches, because I worked at a community house center and I saw that a community house center actually had the ability to be able to start housing. I believe that that's something that we can start working with very closely with the coalition to be able to start seeing if we can come together as a state and be able to create this throughout the state. Also, I did a lot of affordable housing projects in the Inglewood area, worked with Habitat for Humanity. Those are other resources that you can tap into for your clients as well in order to help them hopefully get a house for their children and their families if they qualify, once you've done a great job in being able to advocate and getting them, you know, financially stable with a job or resources financial for their children. The opportunities in affordable housing can also be similar to what you can get from a Section 8 capacity, including resources in public housing as well. The public housing also can move people around, and they already have relationships with other organizations throughout the state, coalitions and housing throughout for housing authorities, where they can help you be able to do that with clients. So if you know that you can tap into those, make sure you start talking to your housing authorities, your affordable housing projects that are located in social services. Another impact that you can do in reference to when you hear about an affordable project that's coming up in your community, talk to them and say, hey, are you able to reserve a unit or two for our clients, you know, to have stable housing so that they are able to maintain long-term housing for them. So it's really important when you hear about those to get involved and put your advocacy points into those types of organizations. We have one that's going up in the Tri-Cities, hopefully, for the homeless population, which is a category that a lot of our clients fit into in domestic violence, to be able to talk to them, and this is through Catholic charities, to talk to them and explore the opportunities to be able to extend special units for our special population. Going into cities and going into your counties and talking to them, being able to do presentations, even if you're doing presentations through city council. I worked for counties and for cities throughout my career. And those are really important ways to be able to get the information out to the community about domestic violence statistics that are happening. Why? Because they're televised, and a lot of the community will be able to see that and be able to see that the services are available, as well as the community that's present when you're doing your presentations. So those are places that you can tap into that you might have not thought of before, that you would be able to find resources. And a lot of times they want to partner up with social service agencies or nonprofit organizations because it gives them more opportunities for additional funding. And so some of the areas in the rural areas with the Tri-City area, we have a big migrant farm worker population. And as I've stated, I had the opportunity to do that type of work, not only in Washington, but also in Idaho, in reference to the farm workers. And the services that we collaborated with there were the migrant programs, which included a lot of the services that were in the school districts, the Head Start programs, again, community health centers, housing authorities. We were part of a housing authority, and we were able to collaborate with the other housing authorities that were throughout the state. Migrant councils that are in your states that also help them. Some of the other areas is going out into the warehouses where women are working primarily, going into, we have a lot of potato plants in the state of Washington, all different types of fruits and vegetables. And there's assembly lines or areas where they are primarily catered to women, going in there and doing presentations, maybe through the employer, and being able to give out your cards and give out information, and talking to the employers about, hey, what about going into housing programs so that, you know, your families are more available, as and getting them to see if they can help fund or assist some of the families that need to be moved so that they can continue their work. A lot of times you may be able to get some subsidies to be able to help that particular population from the farm workers or from the businesses that are providing those services, or that are providing the agencies for their workers. There's wonderful programs throughout California that I've seen, to where domestic violence services have taken housing projects and created them, and, you know, have provided really great security services, a lot of services in-house, like a one-stop shop. Very similar to what you see when you're dealing with clients of disability, clients with mental health issues, and the affordable housing, where you can also provide those services to families, children, or individual women that can be in these type of locations. So there are possibilities. I think that Washington can really make a big change and a big movement if we all start working together and bringing our ideas and trying to find funding to make it happen. We're already in the CSO offices, so, you know, a lot of times our clients will come through that channel. That is the DSHS offices, welfare offices, whatever you may call them in your community. So we do have a person stationed there, and we get referrals within all of the families that are coming in that might be needing services. We also have stations in our police departments for 3 of our cities that we work on, so that we can work with the prosecuting attorneys and doing our legal advocacy. So it's really nice to be in-house, because we have the opportunities to work really closely with the families, the police officers, and there's an abundance of resources there, financial resources, as well as advocacy resources to assist us in being able to continue to provide great services and to be able to prosecute appropriately with great documentation that we provide as advocates, so that families can be able to take time to heal or to be able to move to safety. A lot of times context to other nonprofit organizations, I think we touched a little bit on that, but grab a list of all your nonprofit organizations that are within your community or within your surrounding community and contact them. You know, just have a conversation, ask them if you can come over and talk about your services, provide training to them, or have them come over and give you information about their services so that you're collaborating back and forth and being able to know that everybody's out there trying to help, whether you're poor, a migrant, a family, or any type of drug and alcohol, but that you're all trying to provide the services together in one state or another. We're all going to touch in all of those spaces at one point or another. And sometimes we might have a client that has a lot of those disability, drug and alcohol issues, mental health issues altogether, and domestic violence to top it off as well. So, you know, a lot of times we can share a lot of the services and be able to come up with different resources for housing through those entities as well for them. One of the things that we talked about as well was looking at how you can get connected to more housing resources. Invite realtors in your community to be part of your board. Invite housing authorities, directors, or people that work in housing authorities to be part of your board. Invite people that are on the city council, and let them know, you know, that you have positions open on your board so that they can send people that they know or be part of your board. Invite banks. We've been very lucky with our banks, and we have a realtor and we also have a lawyer on our board. The more that you're able to spread out some of the careers that are in your community, they know a lot of people, and a lot of people know a lot of people, and then you just make it bigger, and then you get more resources, not just for advocacy but also for financial assistance. And you can create your own program where you can have people fund it and be able to help with subsidies for families that are going through domestic violence crisis, and be able to create ongoing funding so that you have that. And people always love to have something a little bit more tangible in reference to housing when you feel like you've helped a family and you've housed them for a year or 6 months, whatever the creativity is. You know, a lot of resources that are paying you or giving you money really want to have those great results from you. So those are some of the things that I think that would be helpful in reference to housing. And as you're meeting other organizations and you're providing information about your services and finding out what services they're providing in your community, you'll be able to expand. We do work with a big population of undocumented in our area as well. There are a lot of organizations that are helping in that area in reference to legal status for domestic violence and or other resources. So make sure that you're tapping into them and being as creative as you can be as a team to be able to help the families either stay in the community or be able to move to a safe community that they can thrive in. So any questions?
You may have wowed us.
Yes, you did. Awesome.
Wowed us, and we don't have any questions.
Okay.
But does anybody have questions, please?
Or contributions from your community.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that I'm definitely impressed, and I feel like Angie embodies what every advocate wants to be and everything that we want to do. So I totally admire you, Angie. Thank you for sharing that. Lots of great information. I like the idea, and something that we're trying to work on to connect with the housing authorities, like you said. It's important that as we do this work to help survivors find stable housing, that we must know how to navigate, right, the housing resources in our communities, and for like the housing authorities to know who we are and the people that we're serving. So I appreciate that. It's definitely something that we're working on. Try to connect with them as well with the tenants union and other organizations and committees around this. So I also appreciated how you said that if there's any like affordable housing project coming up, try to plug into, into those committees, or have a seat at the table so that you can be a voice for the community that you're serving. And I thought those were wonderful ideas, and as well as connecting with pretty much as many organizations in our community as possible. It's definitely something we've been doing, and it works really well to know what's out there, what services others are providing, for them to know what you are doing, and to find ways that you can collaborate and build those bridges to help survivors and like expand services for survivors who have tons of barriers. Like we work mainly with the Latinx undocumented population here in Spokane. And, as you know, there are tons of barriers. So the more connections we make, the more partners we have, the more likely we are to expand those services. So thank you for that.
I also wanted to mention in terms of, affordable housing, and Angie, you just brought up an excellent point in terms of being in those places of council meetings, being in those proceedings where affordable housing is considered, and knowing the community where that affordable housing is supposed to be constructed or proposed to be constructed, because there are still way too many communities where there are neighbors, wonderful people all in their own way, who are blocking that at times. And the better we are as far as a presence, as far as educating, as far as assuring, and as far as just linking arms with our fellow community members, I think the more smoothly that can go. I just in my own local community watched an affordable housing proposal go down because the neighborhood was opposed to it. So just something to think about, in addition to how we can put funding together and forge those partnerships for survivors to be able to look at some of those units as something they could have access to.
I can contribute a little bit more information while people are thinking.
Yeah.
A shout out to Eloisa and to Lizette from our organization. Eloisa Ramirez has been promoted to an advocate for our housing program. So she was promoted right before COVID happened. So she, has had an opportunity to have the leadership of our previous advocate for housing, Lizette de la Mora, and she also was promoted as a project coordinator. And just want to be able to tell you that I want to really support them in all of the things that they're doing. And it's probably overwhelming with them because I'm always running really fast with all of my ideas and trying to help them keep up with that. But I think that in the Tri-Cities area, we have a lot of opportunities because it is a smaller community compared to maybe the bigger cities, Spokane or Seattle, where you can really have these great conversations with the communities and start impacting and making differences. And, a lot of the training that I had through the community health centers through the state of Washington, we did a lot of marching for a lot of different services. One of them was housing and better healthcare services. But, we did a lot of the advocacy in the format of the late Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. And so my motto is always coming from that is, si se puede, we can do it. And, we can do it if we're all working together and we're better understanding it. And again, working for cities and for counties, there are so many resources there for you as agencies, just knowing how to tap into them. Again, I'd be glad to let you know about funding resources that are within those type of entities that you can try to tap into, or even just assistance if not in a financial capacity.
I think that we do have a question from Hansel.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we are a fairly new organization here in Spokane, and we just started. We have two employees, and that got started at the end of January. So before that, it was just volunteer based, and we started at the end of 2018. So still new, learning tons. um, of course, one of the biggest concerns that we have, and I think everybody can relate to that, is funding. I love how far the flexible funding can go. I appreciated how you all presented around that, and made it so clear that, the more flexible funding you have, the more likely you are to better support survivors, right? Removing those barriers and doing things quickly. But, and perhaps this might not be the best question to ask, but like, I wonder, as for sources of funding with flexible funding, would you say they're more likely to be found with like private foundations, or with like just private, like ongoing donations from individuals, or like, in your experience, and that's a question for all of you, where do you see the most potential for organizations to be able to tap into those flexible funding sources?
I can answer a couple of that. We recently, and because of coronavirus, we've had the opportunity, but the Group Health Foundation was one that was able to help us and to be able to use our funds flexibly on anything that we needed for our organization. We also received some from our community, Numerica, which also allowed us to do that. And as we're applying for other community funding with other agencies, we are asking for that flexibility, and we're talking about how that flexibility is really making a difference. So I think that when you're asking, don't be afraid to say that it works, and that's why you're asking for it. And the goal is to keep the families housed as long as possible. I mean, if you're looking for all different types of funding, again, you can contact me if you need some resources that we've been able to tap into. But there are a lot of community resources, your banks in your community, your credit unions, again, your city, your county, and just being prepared, because you have the information right now from WSCADV in reference to how this program worked. Then you're able to be a step ahead by giving that information when you're applying for the grants. Foundations as well. I mean, everything is competitive, so you have to make sure you're really organized and prepared, and that you have your statistics up to date, and that you can show that you're an organization that is making progress. So have a great website to be able to share your information on there as well. And then again, go in and talk to people who have money in these types of areas that I talked about: real estate agents, lawyers, anybody in city council, where there are opportunities where people are in a more stable financial situation, and then they can help you to refer you to other organizations as well, if they can't help you specifically.
Thank you so much, because this officially concludes our little mini webinar series, which I have enjoyed all of the conversations and everything that I've even learned from all of you. And I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add, Linda?
Nope, just thank
Nope.
you.
Thank you once again, Angie, for being a guest on this webinar, and just thank you for the work that you do, for being a guest, and for overall just being you.
Thanks.
You're here. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And thank you to everybody for joining us, of course.